Hello, everybody, and welcome back to The Dive, Season 2, Episode 14. We're back from Miami.
Not very excited about episode 14. Usually you're episode 14.
That was the worst intro.
Really?
Yeah, I think it is. I'm in agreement.
All right, let's hear your intro, Kobe.
Welcome to episode 14. We're back from Miami. Azale is here. Jad is here. We're going to talk about EU, Korea, and North America today.
That was fantastic.
Yeah,
Good job,
bring the
everyone.
hype. You bring the hype, Kobe.
Yeah.
Congratulations. Yeah.
It's like we're doing the dive with a friend.
Let's start with Korea, actually.
Okay.
We usually end up starting with global news. That's usually Korea.
Man, I panicked there, actually. Whew.
You didn't know.
I'm glad
you
that's
pulled it
over.
off.
Yeah.
Pulled it off, but you still didn't put us into the first topic, unfortunately.
Okay.
So-
That's
Pick
why
it
you're
up.
here.
That's for next week.
That's why Dad is here.
Yeah.
Baby steps.
So Afrika Freaks versus King Zone is actually going to be the final in the LCK, but I want to talk a little bit about the semi-final match where they played against KT. People had the telecom war where KT actually dethroned SKT, and you're like, wow, maybe this is KT's year. No, they still didn't even make the finals, but it was a really cool matchup. And I actually, even though I think there's a slim chance that Afrika beats King Zone, there's some stuff that we want to talk about of how cool
Yeah.
their game was.
It was actually just so fun to watch. I mean, some of the times when we start approaching international tournaments and you're grinding VODs and VODs and VODs, you start to get a little bored, writing notes for all the teams.
Yep.
But it is so fun to watch Afrika. And I like how Papa Smithy kept on giving credit to the coaches because there were so many interesting things that they did. And it kind of reminded me of why I fell in love with Misfits at Worlds last year because, they're trying these different counters and trying their own strategies and they're being successful with them. Not only was it, these champion counter picks like the Malphite and the Vel'Koz pulling out, but also the item builds even in the game. They have the Karma mid. He rushes first item banner to keep pressure on the Taliyah, keep him from roaming. And it was just a lot of different looks that really made me excited for this Afrika Kingzone matchup coming up. Even though the whole split, we've been like, oh God, Kingzone's so good. It's going to be insane. They're definitely going to MSI.
Yeah. I mean, I thought it was a really fun series. And to me, definitely the standout was Kuro. I thought not only from picks, but also the builds, like you were saying, the banner rush Karma. I think specifically because it was against Taliyah, like it made so much sense as far as Taliyah's trying to get out of lane and roam and punish the side lanes. Now you have this Karma who's perma pushing with a bannered up minion. If you leave lane at all, like you're probably going to lose your turret or you're going to lose a lot of farm at the very least. So not only did he keep his lane opponent in check, he was actually drawing the jungler there constantly to try to even deal with these banner minions. So like I thought that was so smart. The Vel'Koz really took over that game. The Yasuo game was super hype. Like he gave 4 different champions that were all pretty unique and played them at such a high level. So it was a really exciting series.
Yeah, I liked the item builds mostly out of Afrika. The Relic Shield every game on jungle I thought was pretty cool. There's a chance we'll see more of that at MSI with the fact that cannons now give
For
like
so much.
80 gold.
Yeah.
That's the first thing I was thinking of is like build a banner so you can try and make them
Or a
miss the
relic shield.
cannon. Or I was also thinking build a banner. The next level so you can banner it versus the mage and then it'll tilt them because they can't get the cannon money.
And if you could just run into lane, people always joke about smiting the cannon, but running in relic shielding the cannon, like you're saying, that's like almost killing like a Gromp. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, and based on timings, if you do it mid lane and then run bottom lane, like the timing works out generally correct. It kind of telegraphs exactly where you're going to go and might make you open a counter jungler and could be really awful, but it'll charge up your relic shield so quickly that you'll basically get your jungle sightstone back or your tracker's knife back, and we know that a lot of teams want to do that. But aside from that, in the jungle, I liked the 80 carry builds from Kramer on Varus. Don't know if they're going to keep doing this, but this was the 8.6 Rage Blade, which was like 3,000 gold that then multiplies your AD and AP. So it was that into like a crit build from Varus. So actually a huge amount of AD late game. And yeah, that's pretty much it as far as the banner and the Yasuo stuff. Just a bunch of cool stuff that you could tell they had put a lot of time into that then was effective against KT. Was a combination that's pretty rare.
If you haven't seen that series, I definitely would recommend it. As far as the Rage Blade, I know it gets a huge nerf, 300 gold cost increase for it, and that is one of the biggest cost increases I have actually ever seen
without any change of stats or anything.
Yeah, from our systems teams to an item. And the Rage Blade, it was insanely OP. Like I was rushing it on like any champion that can possibly use it. So maybe it's in like a better spot right now. I'm not sure quite yet if that was an over nerf or maybe it just gets pushed to later in your build.
Yeah, going to be interesting to see. I think you could maybe still do it late, but the game of the series for me would have been game 2.
Yeah.
When it was the Vel'Koz and the Malphite solo lanes from Afrika into the Camille and the Azir. Even though, like, I think you can argue how much of a counterpick Malphite would be into Camille. It still was cool and new and clever in a lot of different ways, and I think was pretty effective in the laning phase. And the fact that they shut out KT in that game as well with such uncommon picks.
Getting to see Tucson play the Rakan separate from the Xayah and also be super effective was pretty cool for me too. I mean, the whole series was definitely really interesting. Like I kind of am pretty interested in the Malphite because I'd heard the Malphite pretty hyped up, like from like some of my friends were talking about it. Like when I went to play yesterday, people were like, oh yeah, did you see the Malphite game? Like a hard counters Camille, all this stuff. And that I watched the game and I think that was pretty like a lot of the community talk was pretty overblown about what it did because in lane Malphite was down like 10 or 15 CS or whatever. It's not like that's horrible, but it felt like mostly he just went even and didn't allow the Camille to really get ahead, but he also wasn't really smashing the Camille. But it is an interesting pick, and I also think it's more examples of the fact that you don't need to just play meta. There's a lot of different champions that can fit into these roles and be very effective. And had the game not been so one-sided, the Malphite likely would have been extremely effective in team fights against the Azir and these sorts of things. Right. But that never really needed to even happen because every lane basically won across the map, and it didn't really get to that point.
Yeah, I agree with you that like super hard counters or whatever are actually pretty rare in the game, but answers like that, unique answers are really cool because Malphite got his W buff so much he gets all this bonus armor, and he's still first built tank items, right? You got your Ninja Tabby and your Sunfire Cape, so you're getting a lot of value out of your percentage armor increases and the passive for extra shield. So it makes sense that he can take the 1v1s with the Squisher Camille, and then the added, I'm building a Trinity Force anyway. It makes you still feel cool about
I wonder
about being like a solo laner, right? Instead of a full tank bot.
It's interesting because with the Q Max, you're obviously trying to like poke out your opponent from lane and stuff. But since that never really happened, like he wasn't actually able to poke out the Camille. Like I don't know if Camille went second win, but he started Doran's shield, and like that alone seemed like it made it hard. So I was kind of wondering if he should have just gone like an Emax. And when you're going early Sunfire with Emax, you have really good wave clear, and you could actually just push in your opponent and then look for roam. So I don't know if that would have been more effective or if it was like a conscious choice to not expose yourself to ganks or what. But it's definitely an interesting to think about. But I felt like it was a pretty competitive series. It did seem to me that KT their macro choices were kind of the downfall for them. Like especially when you're looking at game 3, they're like fateful. I think it was an air dragon or whatever they're going when Afrika's just pushing down mid lane and essentially just like ends the game. Yeah. But I mean, it's got to be kind of disappointing for KT fans to constantly see them fall short in these ways, but it doesn't seem like they fixed a lot of their issues. Like they are still really strong laners, they're strong individually, but they don't work very well as a team.
Hey man, they beat SKT.
They did.
They did it.
That's true.
They got championship points, 3rd place in Korea. Still can go to Worlds.
This was Afrika's first ever series win, right? As far as I know, like
in playoffs. This is their first ever. I think even when they were winning the first game, Papa Smithy was saying it might have even been their first game victory.
Yeah, because they had
playoffs,
like
lost not even whole series.
They had lost 2-0 in the wild card every single other time, and now they're in the finals. So that's pretty crazy.
Yeah. Speaking of the finals, do you have any thoughts going up against Kingzone?
I do have some more thoughts. Azael was saying, Kuro was a standout, and like he was definitely super innovative. I think that their bottom lane is really underrated.
I think Kramer's been smashing.
Their bottom lane as a whole, especially by Western fans, I think is going to be super underrated because, if you haven't been keeping up and watching so many of them, Tucson as well as Kramer, I think have both been exceptional. You mentioned Tucson's Rakan, without, having to be with Xayah. There were changes to the champion to kind of reduce the synergies there and buff him up when he's not paired with her. But that is one of the champions, especially for me. You've heard me complain about Rakan before, being so squishy. And if you don't make use of the quick, engage that he does have, then I feel like it's so bad in the hands of bad players. But Tucson was actually so incredibly good, choosing the initiations as well as executing them. That guy made me really excited to see, the support play that he's going to bring, especially for the, hard initiation champions. So I mean, usually I'm looking at Kingzone and of course praying Gorilla, and you're always like, all right, that's the best, bottom lane that we have to offer. But I'm actually super excited for this matchup now.
And I think So I think it's very heavily Kingzone favored. Like
For sure,
they're insane.
I think
right?
everybody agrees with
exactly.
you.
But
there was a post that every team that was eliminated from LCK playoffs predicts
and nailed it,
Kingzone to win it.
Yeah,
but we're trying to build the hype
You never
here,
know,
Dale.
man.
But
Never know.
my follow up point is just that. So yes, it is Kingzone favored, but I do think that unique picks and unique strategies can be like a really good way if you are an underdog to be able to take games and if not take a whole series. So that's why I was so much more excited for the finals after watching this series, because if you can bring out Vel'Koz and Malphite and these sorts of picks that people are not going to be as practiced against and really play them extremely well. People do not necessarily know all the limits of those champions. They are more prone to making mistakes into those champions, and if you are clean at closing out games, that can be enough of an advantage sometimes to get some games.
Yeah, but also just to prep people on Kingzone, it's essentially Longzhu from last year, who was really good in the LCK and then fell apart a little bit at Worlds. Removed their rookie jungle from last week cuz put in Peanut.
Super Peanut.
He's
Peanut.
like
buffed up now.
He's buffed up because he's with a lot of his old teammates and allowed to do what he wants. They're 16-2 in series score in the LCK, 33-7 in game score. They're 4-1 game score against Afrika Freaks during the regular season, and have just been absolutely smashing people. Like whenever there was like a KT Kingzone game or Kingzone SKT, like they would win in like 26 minutes. They'd win by 10,000 gold by 20 minutes. Like they're doing a lot of stuff that just feels like it's making them untouchable. And occasionally that makes it strange when you get into those like close games. Oh, you're not used to playing from behind, or oh, you got caught off guard by some new pick. Like that's always a possibility. It's just definitely one of the larger favorites I think there's been in an LCK final. And that's coming from a place where SKT has been a huge favorite in the final before.
And they're also a team that, when you speak about flexibility, that's one of the things that has impressed me throughout the year for them too. Like when you look at BDD and his unique champion picks, like he has played so much different stuff. It's actually pretty insane. It's like, 12, 13, 14 unique champions in the mid lane. Like, he's willing to be very flexible. They're all able to play just about everything. Like Peanut as well has bust out like all kinds of different stuff. So it is such a well-rounded team.
Yeah.
But I mean, there's always a chance, right? When we were at Worlds last year, this was the team. Yes, it is not with Peanut, but everyone was expecting so much from them. They got blasted by Samsung once they got into playoffs, and that was a big upset. And Afrika in their first finals, who knows? Maybe they can pull off another crazy upset.
Yeah, Kingzone. It reminds me of when everyone always used to bring up the argument, oh, 5 All-Stars will never work together because there's not enough gold on the map or whatever. Someone has to be the super supportive, like, bad player or whatever. I was always like, no, you always want the 5 best players. There's no situation where I don't want the 5 best players.
As long as they work well together.
Yeah, as long as they work well together. And these guys, they can do that. Like any of them can be the carry, right? And any of them can also support that guy, the guy who's carrying. So I feel like we have the example now.
As long as they don't choke. Otherwise, everyone's going to tell you.
If they do, then I'll just be like, oh, well, never mind, you're right.
I also think it's one of those things where it's like when your players are enough better than the other people, it almost stops mattering if they work as well together because it's like, well, you just won all your lanes. If you have a team with 5 LeBron James, well, no one can guard him once, so you can't guard him 5 times. And so it stops mattering if he plays well.
Yeah. Well, I was also watching a bunch of interviews and older games, researching for MSI prep, and I found the super interesting recent interview, like right after, with the Kingzone coach, talking about the Afrika series, because they had just watched it. They have the advantage in the LCK setup that they have, where number 1 gets to sit at the top, watch everyone else, all the monkeys fight
in the final
until they get to him, and he was like, yeah. Yasuo wasn't that, surprising to us. A lot of people have been playing as solo queue. Papa Smith was always talking about Faker playing it a bunch and stuff. He was like, yeah, it wasn't that surprising. And it made it sound like they were more ready for a lot of these Afrika picks. So that's going to be super exciting. But also, he said he thought that mid and jungle is going to be the most important two roles. And then because the Afrika coach was also there, he was like, I just figured, he's like, in this interview, I also learned what we should focus in our in our series coming up. But it does seem like that would definitely be a difficult thing versus BDD and Peanut. Hard to focus the jungler that's already coming in.
Kuro has been really good though.
Yeah,
he has been.
I'm excited. I have hope.
Yeah, and there's also a little bit of a grudge match, right? Because if you look back to their old Rocks teams, which is somewhat of the incarnation of Kingzone Dragon X with Prey, and Peanut, Kuro was the mid laner on those teams, right? So Kuro kind of got outcast off into the other land because everyone said he was the weak link of those old teams, and actually has been smashing lately. So I'm looking forward to seeing that. But either way, it does mean SKT isn't going to MSI.
0%.
G2 lost to Fnatic, which we're going to talk about really soon. So not the same European team going to MSI. TSM lost in the quarterfinals, different NA team going to MSI. There's a chance, depending on how some of the other things fall, that we have no returning teams from last year's MSI, from any of the regions, which would actually be somewhat crazy considering how many returning teams we had in 2017 from 2016. So that'll be pretty cool.
Yeah.
Well, and it's even crazier with SKT because this is the first time they would ever have not gone to MSI, as far as I know. So it's not even just that they're missing it once; they've never missed it before, and they didn't even get close this time. So it's pretty astounding. It'll be the first time we don't have Faker at MSI, first time we don't have a lot of those guys. So the only player I think who has a chance to actually keep the streak alive of having attended every single one is Dumbledoge. Dumbledoge, and he is not locked in yet, but he could be the one and only.
Yeah. And WoW, so I was thinking about it, why was this happening, right? And it seems like a lot of things just kind of lined up. A lot of those teams made, big changes as far as the players that are actually on the teams.
Okay.
Even though, all the defending champions, the teams are very solid. In a lot of the regions also, the surrounding opponents made a lot of upgrades. So it made sense if you look down at team by team, region by region, what they're going up against and the changes that did happen. But it's still crazy because in past years SKT has made changes. They've made changes like every single year.
Yeah.
But
different top laner every single year.
One of the things I think kind of went wrong for SKT was I think they were expecting that they would have gotten a top laner, and I had heard a number of rumors about various top laners that they extended offers to and got rejected, and that is probably not something you're expecting if you're SKT, right? This is the team that has by far like the most dominant history in League of Legends.
Willy Wonka gold ticket is at your door, and you're like,
nah, dog. I'll have some steamed broccoli over here. I'm fine. But yeah, they got turned down by reportedly a number of top laners, including some from North America, from people like in China, various things, and even it was pretty publicized that they were pursuing Marin, and then Marin decided to take spring off. So like they got rid of Huni, they go after all these guys like, it's no problem, we'll just grab the best of the best like usual. No one was available. No one wanted to come. And now Marin, even for summer, has signed in the LPL. So I was expecting if things didn't work out in spring that he would go to SKT in summer, but he's off his break and he's not available there. So it'll be interesting to see how SKT is able to bounce back or if they are able to bounce back.
Yeah, well, Marin actually signed with like a bottom tier LPL team.
Yeah, it's Top, I want to say, is the team.
I think that's the name of them. But yeah, SKT, I think one thing that happened last year with Peanut and Huni is potentially like think about it if you are a top laner and you're thinking about playing on SKT with Faker. Like Peanut and Huni were somewhat outcasts, right? Like you're not guaranteed your starting spot the whole year because if you're underperforming a little bit, they're going to sub in a different guy for you. There's a chance you're only there for 1 year anyway because we know that that's Faker's show, right? So maybe it's not as attractive as a place as it used to be. And I wonder if they're going to get anyone for summer because we know with all the long-term contracts that so many guys are signing, I don't think we're going to have the same amount of turnover worldwide that we normally do between spring and summer. So them losing in the playoffs to KT and getting 4th place in LCK, there's a chance they don't make Worlds, right? Like a very real possibility that we're going to have to track in the summer split. We're going to start that conversation now, Kobe.
We're going to bring back the meme. Can SKT still make Worlds?
I mean, it's funny, but it's a little bit true, right? And I actually do think it's a really good point that you bring up because I've always had the impression that like SKT is legendarily very strict, right? Like even Peanut talking about it, it's not like it's kind of a no fun zone. It's like super serious all the time, focused on the game. It's about winning, right? And this is the team that always won. And for the first time last year, they looked somewhat vulnerable. And if the only reason you go to SKT is to win, and you are no longer like have this kind of
Winning's no longer guaranteed.
Invincible aura around you, that you're like, okay, I'll go there, I'll work really hard. It might not be fun, but I'm going to be a world champion. And if you don't think that that is the best possible chance to do it, and it's not going to be fun, and it's going to be really strict in these sorts of things, then all of a sudden you're like, well, do I like?
And potentially other teams are paying you more too.
Exactly. So that it starts to lose some of its luster.
Also, a decent amount of the players had the mentality like Smeb heading into it already. He was like, I'm not going to play on a team with Faker. I want to be the one that beats Faker. And that's kind of the mentality that he had when he joined KT and all that. And that's been his goal ever since Rocks Tigers. In the end, it was actually Samsung.
In the end, he should have stayed on the old team. He should be in Khan's position. But let's move on from LCK. Go to the European LCS, where Fnatic had a 3-0 against G2.
With Pentas aplenty.
Yeah.
I combined it.
One official Penta.
With
Two unofficial
Pentas aplenty.
Pentas, because the timer ran out in game 1 on Reckless's Tristana pentakill. But still a pretty interesting series nonetheless. Personally, like, they had a sub-top laner for Soaz, who was on tank duty. We'll talk about him later. We're going to talk about the gameplay first. But I was specifically impressed with Fnatic's game 3. And the reason was, when they were doing the Baron dance, it was Caps' Rise doing a lot of split push duty, and then Reckless and the rest of the team just having really good wave management, which is something they weren't capable of doing last year. Reckless actually said when he was on the EU4 podcast how last year the reason he was split pushing so much was because Caps didn't know how to play side lane. So it was always Caps in the mid lane, Rex on the side lane, which isn't really the optimal way to play League of Legends. And this year, Fnatic's been all about not needing to get kills to win, and instead playing the map to get wins. And I thought Game 3 in that series was the largest indicator that they were capable of doing that, because they weren't necessarily up in kills the whole time, and they just kept extending this lead, getting turrets, getting inhibitors, and pressuring Baron. And they were so much better than G2 at that, which was the biggest standout to me, because we know Caps and Reckless are capable of winning 1v1, but the fact that they can win team play actually makes them a much more dangerous team.
Yeah, I think Game 3 was definitely a good example of that. And Games 1 and 2 were good examples of literally them being better at 5-on-5 team fighting. Like, the fact that in game number 1 they won like 3 team fights back to back, and G2 had started with this like 5,000 gold lead or something.
With the Jinx and Tom Kench as well.
Yeah. I mean, yes, Fnatic had drafted Braum compared to Tom Kench, with there's a huge discrepancy in what you're going to bring to a 5-on-5. And Reckless was a monster, and he did get multiple pentas in the series. But I really think a lot of credit should be given to the Fnatic frontline. The kind of unsung heroes of the 5-on-5 team fighting is always the tank role, where they had such good flanks from Whippo, the top laning you're talking about, as well as Broxa and Hylissang, all denying the enemy AD carry time to get auto attacks off by focusing with crowd control, and really good zoning, and also trying to peel the enemy tanks for Reckless. I just felt like the frontline difference allowed for so much uptime for Reckless as compared to Hjarnan. It was just insane, and it led to these crazy numbers like 1.4 thousand DPM for Reckless on the Tristana game and stuff like that. I just thought that they really navigated those team fights well.
Yeah, I think the front line is a good point. Like, they did really outperform, I think, on G2's side, or sorry, on Fnatic's side. I also felt like so much of how the team fights like looked came down to the fact that G2 didn't know how to play the map in response, right? Like, because they were taking, when you look at game number 1 and the Baron that they tried to actually take, where they essentially like all got aced afterwards, like they are just forcing themselves into these positions. Like, a lot of the bad team fights all seemed around decisions around Baron or inaction around Baron, where they're getting split pushed on and they're not understanding necessarily how to respond and position themselves on the map. And it's like it felt like it was allowing Fnatic to pick the fights at the right times that they wanted and find those flanks and things like that. And I was actually pretty disappointed with how Wadid played. I actually thought he individually played pretty poorly in a number of the fights on Tahm Kench. Like sometimes, using his Devour on the wrong target. There was one critical fight where he uses it on Cho'Gath and then Jinx immediately dies. But like, it is one of those things where you can look at a tank and be like, oh, that's so easy. But Fnatic's tanks did play it a lot better. They navigated the fights a lot more intelligently, and they were given the opportunity to choose the correct fights because they played the map so much better. So it really did feel like kind of the total package, which, as you say, makes it that much more impressive, right? Like, it honestly kind of reminded me a little bit of the TLC9 series, where you see C9 is able to get these leads, and G2 had good individual players and were able to win lanes and these sorts of things, but then they didn't really know what to do with it, and it started to feel a little bit inevitable, as it did in that TLC9 series, where Team Liquid just played the map so much better than C9. Fnatic just played the map so much better than G2, and additionally, we're just way better at team fighting. Like, their 5v5 was pretty nasty. I mean, Reckless was deathless in the whole series. Obviously, had a pretty standout series.
And take Game 1 as an example, where G2 is the team with the Tahm Kench and the Ryze. That is your play the map with the lead team. And they had a 4,000 to 5,000 gold lead and a Baron, which, by the way, if Perkz just would have saved his Ryze ult for after they took the Baron, they could have all escaped and never even started that snowball, and probably closed out Game 1 pretty swiftly. But they weren't able to play the map properly pretty much the whole time. So there is, in my opinion, a little bit of G2 choking in that, right? It wasn't all just this amazing Fnatic macro machine. There was G2 definitely making some very clear mistakes in the series, but still pretty impressed with Fnatic's growth as a team overall. What about Bwipo? I know we have some thoughts on that.
He's so cocky, man. So the thing that really rubbed me wrong about it, I love that he says he's better than the other team. I love that he says he's better than the other players. I really, what made me immediately go, ooh, don't like that, was when he was like, yeah, I'm as good or better than Soaz. Like, we're number 1 or number 2. They were already thinking of playing me instead of Soaz before he got injured. Like, these sorts of things. I don't like that you trash talk your teammate. To me, that's such a no-no. You never do that publicly. You leave your teammates, like, if you want to say something, if you think you're better, prove it. Great. I love trash talking the other teams. Like, that's great. But as far as, like, there's nothing worse for hurting team morale than that sort of infighting, and even taking, like, locker room topics or whatever, going public, that sort of thing. Like, if you think you're better than them, prove it, and you'll get played, and people will understand that, right? Like, that is what really kind of rubbed me wrong about it. So as soon as he started talking bad about his teammate Soaz, who has such a tremendous career, is known as one of the greatest players in EU, not only did it seem insanely cocky, but it just seemed like, come on, man, have some class.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you there. Yeah, not a lot of room for argument on the other side, honestly.
He did clarify a little bit on Twitter. He's like, I want to make a statement on my recent behavior. I'm coming over as incredibly cocky. I have no intention of taking back my words. He wanted to clear things up, and he basically said, Soaz will be the starter unless his injury gets in the way, and that saying he was the best top laner is premature, but he will want to do it later. I still agree with you that, like, I love trash talk.
Yeah.
And I think it's fine to be like, yeah, man, I did it. But also, look at what he actually did in the games. He gives up first blood both of the first 2 games. Game 3, he gets first blood, but immediately dies to the turret after because they fumbled the turret dive, and gives essentially a kill over to the enemy top laner. And he was a really good frontliner in teamfights. I won't take away from that. Like, he had super strong Qs. But he's played like 8 games. Like, you can say that you're great, but don't then be, as you say, don't slip in that part about Soaz. After you've basically been the sub, great, you were a serviceable tank. That's not the time to say those things.
Yeah, because it's funny if you're trash talking the rest of the league, right?
Yeah.
And even if they trash talk you back, haha,
That's
whatever.
great.
Or even if you give up first blood.
Hey,
after
we got the
trash
2 best
talking.
top laners.
Yeah.
We proved it. And they'll be like, and they can be like, no, you haven't. Like, you've played tanks, but you still said it and you've won. And, like, winning cures all. When you win, you can say what you want, so to speak. But
yeah, but I feel like one of the biggest reasons to not bring up, the internal stuff and the team stuff is because your team is gonna perform better, and you are going to have a better relationship with the starter or the substitute, as the other guy, if if you are both on the same page and you have this friendly relationship and you are trying to learn from each other and work off of each other and try and have that team mentality, if you start to bring in the competition in-house and be like, oh, I'm better than you, I'm going to get tomorrow's starting spot. And then the other guy's going to start like hiding stuff or keeping stuff close to him. And the trust is going to kind of crack, and you're not going to have a better overall outcome because the synergy is gone. You don't get to build together. And that's what kind of, was a like a too bad there, because you don't really get to get a second chance at that type of stuff. Once the seed of doubt has been placed, you're like, do I really trust Azale? I mean, he is kind of sneaky.
I don't know. Should you? I mean, I think part of it is like he was really feeling himself when he won, right? Like he's played a couple games,
and he just won a title.
And he got to win a title, right? So that's part of it. And I don't know how old he is, but I'm sure he's very young. And you're on stage, and even in the post game interview, he's like, I proved I'm the best, right? It's like, well, your team was way better than the other team. Like the games weren't really against you, like, or about you.
Caps, and they were crushing each game, and you were there. Like, you were successfully teamed.
I thought he did have some really good flanks and some really good frontline play.
Way better than I expected. Like,
he was definitely strong. It was strong, right? But it wasn't like, hot damn, this guy just carried the game. It was like, ooh, he's a pretty good tank.
Yeah. When I first saw that Soaz was injured and I saw that video, I'm like, oh, damn, this could be trouble for them. Like, good thing they started Whippo in week 9 and gave him some reps, but there's still a chance that he, gets picked on and there's a liability. And I actually do think he was picked on and was not good in the laning phase. So, like, if the rest of the team wasn't winning, he would have been a liability. But credit to him, he didn't tilt in any of those games, and he played in team fights.
Also, he stopped his Scion ult early so Reckless could get the last auto on the last guy for his pen.
All right, I take it back. He's the best.
Would a cocky player do that, Azale?
I was judging the speed, and I was like,
you're off the team if you take that. He's like, ah! Puts on the brakes.
Yeah.
I was like, ooh, that was just in time. Good job.
Calculated. One guy I did want to give credit to, though, from G2's side, talking a bit more individually about the games, I actually thought Jankos was a monster in the series. Jankos, like, his early games were so incredibly good. It felt like he was finding, so many ganks, so many opportunities, and really performing well individually, which I think, is noteworthy, because he was always supposed to be like the choke artist in playoffs who could never get to finals, and he did get to finals, and not only did he do that, but I actually thought individually he performed incredibly well. I thought he was really, really shining in this series, and one person does not win this series, right? But he really did stand out, and then also on the other side, Caps, I think, a pretty incredible series from him too. Even just going up against Perks, obviously everyone already knew Caps was really good, but I think it has to feel good from Caps' point of view to be able to like be beating Perks individually in some of these games and really looking strong, because Perks has been considered the best in Europe for quite a while, right?
He won 4 in a row.
Exactly.
That's Zoe solo kill.
Yeah,
his Zoe is actually really good. Cap Zoe. I think people are definitely gonna have to keep that in mind for MSI.
Speaking of that, Miami. Move on to North America. Team Liquid, also a 3-0. Really fast 3-0, too. Technically the fastest finals we've had in game time. Second fastest series we've had, with the fastest being the third place match of Echo Fox demolishing Clutch. It was a fast weekend, but let's just start with thoughts on TL and the way they kind of came together throughout this season, because they started hot. They were 5-1. Then they lost that showdown with Cloud9. Seemed to be finding themselves throughout the rest of the regular season. But as soon as playoffs rolled around and they committed to bot lane priority, it worked, and it didn't seem like anyone could touch them.
Yeah, I think the journey, this split, was really interesting for Team Liquid because of the kind of tribulations that you talk about them going through. There were questions at times, during the regular season, Impact actually wasn't consistent.
He was bad in a lot of games.
Yeah, there were times, and then there was a lot of interviews and stuff in the public about Doublelift and Ole not having instant synergy, and going through a process of how do we give and take feedback, and that's a difficult thing to do. Fortune 500 companies struggle with that stuff for years and years, but it seems like they were able to make a lot of headway in a lot of these areas. You know, the communication they talked about, you know, one example was the Mia calls or whatever, where Smoothie specifically was like roaming on them, killing, you know, top side, killing bottom side, that type of stuff. They were able to clean up that communication. It seems like the bottom lane is working better together. They're probably not where they want to be, I think they said, but the improvements were definitely seen in the finals, as well as it makes you think back to when they were struggling, and Double had that interview where he's like, "Don't worry, guys. We're trying stuff on stage. You know, we're not trying our optimal strategy. We know what has the highest percentage, you know, win for us, and we're not, you know, trying to do that." And everyone's like, you always say that. And now you're like, oh, okay, because they had this like very formulaic win strategy, and you're like, okay, Double, if I see you.
The thing that stood out to me after their 3-0 was hearing more about how they've actually been trashing literally everyone in scrims. And I know we hear about scrims sometimes, but even like 100 Thieves was saying, yeah, when we scrimmed them, like we couldn't beat them in scrims. Like they just beat us every time. And then you heard those clutch stories about Team Liquid winning every scrim in like 10 minutes and just being up 20 kills to 0. There was no one that was even coming close to beating TL in scrims for like the past 3 weeks of the regular season. So finally they translated some of that onto stage, but that type of scrim dominance is pretty rare.
Yeah, it's funny because before I was like, oh, I'm not going to take, you know, scrim results into accounts for predictions.
But it reaffirms now.
Well, when I got there first
but after
day,
you see, you have to ask.
The first,
will Team Liquid?
The first day in Miami when I was talking to both of them, and Echo Fox and Team Liquid were just like, yeah, we're just so much better than the other teams. We're just stomping them in all of these scrims, and it's like we win every single one. So then I based both my predictions for third place and first place match off of that.
Off scrims?
Off of the scrim. And they turned out to be right. So I'm back on that scrim hype train.
Did you predict the double 3-0 though?
I did not. I did not. I was not that bold.
Yeah.
But
I got the Echo Fox series. I was pretty wrong about the finals.
Yeah. I mean, I thought Clutch was going to show up on stage like they always do. We've been hearing they've been sucking in scrims all year.
Yeah.
And then it turned out to also suck on stage for once.
It is interesting because so you come away from it and you're like, yep, Team Liquid absolutely blasted them. This was like, you know, not a close series and stuff, but I did feel like, well, in both the series, but, you know, talking just specifically about the finals, game one felt like it was 100 Thieves' game to win, and it really did seem like that one play around Baron. The Baron gets stolen by Smithy, and that was enabled by like a really nice play from Impact because he actually throws his like goop over the wall on Singe. I can't think what that ability is called.
Mega adhesive.
Which grounds.
I got you. I think you said that in the cast too.
Did I? I wasn't casting.
Oh no, never mind. It was Irene. It was Irene. He had the same thing where he couldn't think of the name. He called it like goop also.
There you go.
Or whatever. That was pretty.
Green minds think alike, but that denied Afromu from actually like stopping the steal, right? Because that is a standard play. Your Alistar stands to the edge. He wards over the wall, and when you're getting ready to smite, he headbutts the jungler out of range because, and that's how you prevent it. And that's what they were counting on. But I don't think they even took into consideration the fact that Singe could actually go for this sort of play. But that in combination with the fact that Smithy actually pulled it off, turned that game on its head. And I really felt like from that game state, it was 100 Thieves game, you know, if they get that Baron. And everything went bad after that. Game 2, game 3, like it felt like a little bit of mental boom to me. So it was really interesting to kind of see, A, Team Liquid played incredibly well, but B, like, what would the series have looked like, you know, if that didn't happen?
Yeah, I will say that was a huge moment in the series. The game leading up to 100 Thieves set up to the Baron was still in TL's favor, right? Like, yes, there was that brief moment in time where 100 Thieves was in a position to win, but TL had bot lane priority with Caitlyn. They had like a 2,000 gold lead, and then it was actually 100 Thieves who generated a few Skarner picks to get it even in gold and then force the Baron, which could have given them momentum in that game. But I think Team Liquid was actually winning the early game in that one.
If I recall, Team Liquid was down in gold because 100 Thieves swapped top,
not
took
before
first
the picks.
turret, got first blood as well. They were losing in lane, but after the lane swap top, they were up in gold.
I'm kind of remembering more like Jat, where Team Liquid had the momentum or some leads early, then 100 Thieves started making multiple plays, and it was through a lot of playmaking that 100 Thieves got this opportunity.
Exactly. Like
at
they
that
were in
point-
a position to win before the Baron, for sure.
Yeah, that's what
but
I'm
it was
talking about,
basically
like,
they
at the
picked
time of
double
the
lift,
Baron.
and that's what gave them the opportunity. Before that, it was TO winning the early game.
Yeah. Anyways, I really do like the point about the Singe thing too. I wouldn't have even realized it until Zyrene said it, but then it got me also thinking about other things that you can do with the Mega Adhesive, and a lot of like priority things in the meta right now, like Ornn, because it's ranged. You can put Mega Adhesive, shoot it onto Ornn after he starts his ultimate, and it counts as a dash to try and do the second headbutt.
Wait, so you block the second part?
So
of
you
the
can
one-off?
just if he's on it. I
That's
feel like
insane.
that's a range counter to Ornn ultimate, so you don't have to just have Braum. And so more picks like that, like you're talking about, Azelle, earlier about the creativity of teams like Afrika.
Yeah.
I think that'll be super interesting because there has been so much discussion on impact for the last like 2 years almost about how he's only this tank player. And, during the playoffs, he's not as consistent in playoffs and international events. He kind of gets this buff or whatever, and he's super consistent and he performs well. But now with Conqueror coming in with the new patches that we're going to be on for, which is going to be 8.8, that's not even out, by the way, for MSI. People are also already starting to speculate, is Impact going to be, the weak point of Team Liquid? They're not going to be able to do this formulaic style that they went all the way through playoffs and stuff through. What do you guys feel about these types of things that have been leveled at Impact? Because I thought that his Singe pick was so big for them when he was taking like 8 tank bans or whatever, and he still got something in his pocket, and he has these creative uses for the abilities even.
Yeah. One thing about Impact is he is not your traditional Korean top laner, if that makes sense. He is super good at team play, has like leadership qualities, and makes a lot of plays outside of lane. Whereas a lot of times you'd think of a Korean top laner like doesn't lose lane and plays really safe and stuff like that. I do think there were times in the season where he was really weak. And I do think if it does become about carries, that's going to limit TL a little bit in the ban phase. But I don't think the meta is guaranteed to go back to carries. Like you can look at what's happening in the LCK playoffs, and we'll see in the LPL playoffs with tank picks, like the Afrika series. If you pick Malphite into Camille, that's totally something Impact can do, right? And then you're now forcing bans from the other team. His Ornn is super solid, Scion's super solid. His Maokai was not against Gnar, but as you say, his Singe was strong as well. So I don't think he will be a liability, but I'm not expecting him to be like this huge boon of advantage for Team Liquid at MSI.
It'll be interesting to me because I think the thing where it gets really tough. I mean, you can look at like the Malphite and Camille and stuff, but like every lane is winning for the Malphite's team, and in those situations it can become really easy. I think it can become extremely hard to make plays when everyone's losing or everyone's behind or you're being pressured heavily. And like at international, when you're talking about like playing against the best teams, if you're playing against LPL teams or the LCK teams and stuff, like you can't always expect to get these mistakes. And it was kind of interesting, like, I feel like when you play less heavily about like your mechanical skill and like less about just like winning lane and more about making these plays on the map or capitalizing on your opponent's mistakes, you're relying on those mistakes, right? You're relying on those things to show up. And if teams are playing at a higher level or like and not showing you those mistakes, then it can become pretty tough, I think, to actually find a way into the game. So that's maybe my concern. And I do think that while Impact has had a lot of flexibility as far as the tanks he is willing to play, if people feel that his laning phase is exploitable, we may see more heavy priority on trying to get those laning phases and actually trying to set them up and camp for them, right? Because even in that Malphite Camille game, the Camille is up a bit of farm and it was an uninterrupted lane, right? If you start killing off the Malphite, then those things can start to become problematic, but obviously from behind a tank still can have impact. So it's like, I don't think he's going to be irrelevant by any means because tanks, like a good tank player, is always going to have use in the game. But if Double Lift and Olay like aren't advantaged against the bottom lane, and your top laner is kind of losing lane a little bit, like is Pobelter going to outcarry some of these like the caps or something? Like that's where it starts getting more concerning, where everyone has to perform at a really, really high level to beat teams that are equally or even better.
I would even challenge the idea that Impact is gonna be only a tank player. Teams are banning Camille and Gangplank against him already, and he played. People are talking about how he's played a whole bunch of it in solo queue. So, and he has a Jax skin. He has an SKT Jax skin.
Yep.
Like I feel like he has it in him to, show some more looks for us. So. I'm definitely curious to see what it will look like, right? I mean, yes, I think that he, has a much higher tendency to play the tanks, and it's probably going to tend towards that. But
yeah,
I wouldn't completely rule it out.
But there's also a reason, I mean, that like when you look at the received bans, it's all tanks. Their most received bans are all tanks for top lane. When you look at the bans that they're doing, they banned GP in 90% of the games, and the only games that they didn't ban it in was when their opponents banned it, because GP's good into tanks, right? Like they very clearly wanted to play tanks and play into tanks. It's the same reason they banned a lot of Cho'Gath and like as well, and they had a really high focus on that throughout playoffs, and I think that's a totally valid strategy. And can work. And I do agree he can play GP. When you think about some of his best games in the past in NALCS, it was playing GP and holding on against heavy pressure and these sorts of things. So he certainly is capable. I'm looking at it more from the point of view of like, is he exploitable maybe against like the very, very best teams? I think probably, yeah. But like, we talked about before, they're probably not good. Like Kingzone, it's not reasonable to expect to beat them anyway, probably. And if IG or whoever like people are expecting comes out of China, that's going to be a very uphill battle anyway. But past that, do I think that Bwipo or Soaz is going to like really exploit Fnatic and make him weakness? No, I don't. Do I think any of the other teams are? No, I don't. Not at all. And if the LPL or LCK teams do, it's probably just because they're just a better team, right? Like it's less about the individual thing, where I think it's interesting because if we're going into Worlds, I'd actually be more concerned, because then there's more teams from these top regions that then you end up with like Smeb and other top laners and Khan and all these guys who then can maybe like there's more matchups that you're more concerned about. But at MSI, because there's just like one from each region, and you're not really expecting to beat the Korean team or the LPL team anyway, it's like, well, okay, maybe you're not going to have problems against the others.
Yeah, and if like we know it's going to be Kingzone or Freaka. I think it's going to be Kingzone.
Yeah.
IG is a huge favorite in the LPL because they're actually 18-1 in the regular season.
And the Shy is insane.
Even more dominating.
I mean,
we're basically
Duke, like,
looking
even if they use Duke, like Duke's played a lot as well.
We're basically looking at like, can NA finish top 4 to make it bracket stage?
Yes.
Because we know they're in the group stage with 2 other teams that will be determined from the play-in stage. Maybe it will be the Vietnam team and the LMS if like patterns hold. And then it's kind of about the showdown between Fnatic and TL. Who's going to, like, what's your first impression on their matchup with Fnatic? Because that's essentially kind of what we're arguing. I don't think we're going to argue that TL should be favored against IG or against Kingzone if they make it.
I think that Vietnam is also going to be super fearsome. So that's
it's interesting because it's not the Gigabyte Marines.
Right, but so there's been so much about Vietnam, how big the region is, and also like other good players have come out of Vietnam. So I'm looking forward again, to the kind of the reveal, because I feel like there's a reason that they were made, into their own region this time around, and have a spot.
It'll be really interesting because I do think how good the Vietnamese team looks in play-ins will reveal a lot about the tournament.
Yeah.
Because the Gigabyte Marines, they lost Levi. Levi was their big star, and when I remember it was either going into Worlds or MSI last year, they were actually role swapping in the finals and still sweeping the team and stuff. Like they were so much better than the rest of their region, and maybe the region has improved enough over the year, or maybe talent has diluted enough. Like I'm just wondering, is there another team that is Gigabyte Marines level that is coming out of that will challenge internationally, or was that like the kind of exception? Because if there is, that's super exciting, and then the tournament becomes much more wide open, because then there is very clearly like more than just the 4 teams, and if you do have a Vietnamese team and like a Turkish team or whoever comes out and can really challenge like LMS etc. Then the tournament becomes much more wide open, and these questions become more pressing.
Yeah, and my pressing questions for TL are actually less about impact, because I think he's such an internationally clutch player, and more about whether Doublelift can have a good showing internationally, because he always seems to dominate domestically and then isn't great on international stage. And then Pobelter and Xmithie, if you think back to week 2 Worlds last year when Immortals had that collapse, they didn't keep up with the meta. Xmithie was playing jungle Ezreal, and we had all these graphics prep to talk about how great Pobelter's week 1 was, and as soon as we did that, he started feeding. Like, those two guys definitely choked in the second week of Worlds, and that's what I'm interested in doing. Xmithy's had a good MSI before. He made it to finals on COG. Pobelter hasn't. He wasn't on that COG team. Doublelift was also not on that COG team when that happened. So those are actually my bigger questions towards whether or not TL can succeed is what's Pobelter and Xmithy going to do against Peanut BDD, or if Rookie gets there, like and or even Broxa Caps, because those guys have had a really good duo throughout all the ULCS. So that's what I'm really interested in.
It's also kind of interesting because Doublelift has never actually gone to MSI, and and that's something that you wouldn't necessarily realize because he's been around forever and he's gone to Worlds a ton of times, but he's never actually been on the team that is one spring split because with CLG it was after he left and 6A was there, and then with TSM most recently it was with Wild Turtle while he was taking spring off, so he hasn't actually gone himself. And this is an opportunity for him to kind of have, a big international showing. But as far as against Fnatic, like I think that TL definitely has the ability to beat Fnatic, and Fnatic definitely has the ability to beat TL. I think it's going to come down to like how these teams are playing as far as the meta goes and how they're working together, because both of them looked like severely outclassed their opponents and played the map much more intelligently than their opponents in the finals. So like these are two teams that I think should be fairly evenly matched as far as when you look at like individual skill, as far as you look being able to play the map and these sorts of things, and it could be pretty interesting because I do agree, Jat, that like a lot could come down to Doublelift and Olay and how they're playing as a duo, because I think that Reckless and Hillsang like play so well together. And while I do think that like Olay and Doublelift individually could be just as good, they haven't necessarily shown that they have the same level of cohesion as those guys.
Anything else? Want to move on to Twitter questions?
Let's do it.
Sweet. We got one Twitter question. I'm searching for a few more right now, but how do you think Conqueror will affect MSI? This is from Johnson, or at Damn For Real Lol. How will Conqueror affect MSI and LCK finals? Will it force junglers to be tanks to avoid some weird teamfight matchups? Is Conqueror not strong enough and will be played around? So essentially, like, what will Conqueror do to the patch? We talked about this a little bit already.
Yeah, I think Conqueror will be in the meta. I don't think it's going to eclipse tanks, though. As a lot of people were like, oh, Conqueror is in, can't play tanks anymore because it, true damage conversion, and it's so good for bruisers. We already saw some LCK playoffs with Conqueror. They're on 8.6 already, and tanks are still getting played just fine. There are, I think it will be used though, right? I think it does add some diversity.
Yeah, I'm kind of a similar opinion. I mean, I think that the champions it's good on just kind of got better, but it didn't like completely change the situations in which you would use them, right? Mm-hmm. And some of the champions who it's like super, super good on, like by far the best on, are also just really risky. Like I think one of the biggest winners for Conqueror, and I think we even talked about this probably when it was coming out, is Tryndamere. Tryndamere is actually super, super strong with Conqueror, but is Tryndamere a competitive pick?
What do you play it into?
That's my point, right? So it's like it doesn't like a lot of the champions that are like super, super good with it. You probably won't even use in competitive. It doesn't necessarily change the situations in which you would use the champions.
I think Kled might be a better example because he's closer to the meta. It's super good on Kled, so maybe we see, but like you're saying, it's not going to change the situation that you see that champion in. Exactly. It does make him better.
And even with Kled, press the attack is like the same win rate as Conqueror, right? Like it's not actually even massively better. Like the only one that I can really think of, and I'm trying to actually look through and see if there's anything that I'm not thinking of, that it is massively better on, does seem to be like Tryndamere. Because even Camille, we still see people taking comments sometimes. Press the attack is better in like these short matchups. It's really about like grinding it out on tanks and these sorts of things. But Conqueror does affect it. I mean, LCK and LPL and stuff we've seen like Renekton with Conqueror. I do think that you can see like Fiora and Kled and even Camille and these sorts of champions bringing it. We saw Yasuo in the African series play Conqueror as well, but that wasn't even into a tank, right? Like I think it's good, but it doesn't completely change the meta. It's just like you have to already be good at playing that style, and split push is just a very hard style to do. So it's not like you're going to see TL completely abandon the tank strategy and be like, no, we're going to split push with impact every game because of Conqueror. It's not that much better.
It's interesting too about the win rates with things like that when there are similar keystones, and a lot of the success of a keystone will depend not on the champion that you're using, but on the champions that you're against.
Yep.
And the faith that I have in like the general population choosing the right keystones against the right
Totally.
opponents or whatever.
And that
I'm
totally
Yasuo.
comes into play.
I'm playing Conqueror rather than thinking about I'm Yasuo in this matchup. Therefore, I'm going to take Conqueror.
Yeah, like I actually think that in the mid lane matchup into, I believe he was playing into Talia, it's actually just better to be press the attack probably, right? Like it's for bursting and stuff.
Yeah.
But
You just reminded me.
Fleet, maybe.
You just reminded me of Kuro's dragon fight.
That was hype.
the Yasuo dragon fight where he gets the knock off and they just.
Couldn't have done that without.
That's
Conqueror.
a good series. Plug the Afrika series again.
Go watch it. That thing's awesome. Next Twitter question: Elliot James Menge says, "First, hope you had safe travels back to LA. Thank you. I actually really hate the Miami to LA flight because it's deceptively long. But I'll continue the Twitter question. I've heard a lot about aggressive play styles in other regions compared to NA, and wonder if you think TL's style, especially from finals, will be able to match them at MSI."
I mean, I think so. It's about minimizing mistakes, right? Like it's not like you have to play ultra aggressive, but like when you watch the LPL, a lot of their games are decided, on these ultra aggressive like 5-man bot plays and these sorts of things that people are able to pull off. And if a team is going for that sort of play and you can deflect it or shut it down, then you have a big advantage, right? If you do not, then you're probably screwed, because if you lose your bot duo and you lose the turret and you lose all those things, the game snowballs, and the teams are good enough to do that. So it's to me, the question is how well can they prepare for those strategies and deflect them, right? Because I don't think that overnight you can just change your entire strategy and adapt to that. So it's how well can you respond?
Yeah, I would say that Team Liquid has scrimmed a bunch with Echo Fox, and Echo Fox are an extremely aggressive team, even more in scrims that we have never even seen than on stage.
I've also heard that Echo Fox doesn't have a huge amount of value scrimming against because
That might be true too.
they always just 2v2 top lane. So you're wondering, like, what do? We either counter gank, or we know Dardoch's not going to be in bottom lane or mid lane, so do we gank those? Because it's going to be top, and they just like drill that over and over again. So if you're expecting someone to camp top lane, Echo Fox is a great scrim opponent because they're really good at that. But that's always one of those funny things.
One thing I think that changes a bit, and probably like playing at Echo Fox is probably really good prep for like the super aggressive teams for top side of the map.
Yeah.
But their bottom side of the map, compared to some of the LPL bot lanes, which are pretty insane and super aggressive, and that's one of the differences to me is how heavily the focus is always there. Like it seems like no matter what, they're going to all be bot. It's going to be this insane fight. Like, and the thing is, it's weird because I want to say like it's like a high risk, high reward type situation. But then when you watch IG and they just like do it every game and it works every game, you're
How
like,
risky is it really?
Like, yeah, like is it even that risky if you can do it perfectly? Like if you can just set it up this well, and I guess I'm really hoping that IG qualifies because I want to see IG versus Kingzone. Like that's like my dream matchup to watch at MSI because I think that would be so exciting.
I'm hoping they make it based on the regular season, and also to see if the LPL is playing the game right, so to speak.
Because they play it different.
They play it differently. They're the one region that actually feels like they're not a part of the same global meta that everyone else is. They play, on average, 5 minutes faster than other regions.
We just had the fastest finals week ever.
We're the best.
We're
Take it
trying.
back.
Just saying.
I know our playoffs were definitely fast,
saying.
but
That's
the
true.
league in general playing
I know.
5 minutes faster than everyone else. I want to see how that manifests at MSI. But you guys got anything else to add? I think that's the last Twitter question I was able to pull.
You did a great job.
Thanks, man.
I'm proud of you.
That's going to do it for episode 14 of The Dive. Spring Split is done. TL is going to MSI. Fnatic's going to MSI. Still a few more teams to qualify.
Kingzone's going to.
LPL playoffs is just starting, by the way. There's an 18
still
playoff.
make MSI?
First game is tonight between RNG and Team WE. So watch that one because somehow those guys are playing in the first round of the playoffs based on regular season results. We will announce at a later date when our next episode is. Keep tuned for it. We'll probably still be releasing on Wednesday for our next one, but keep your hands on Twitter for Riot Azale, Riot Kobe, Riot Chat. We will tweet as soon as we know when our next episode is. So see you then.